June 12, 1943. The control stick trembled in the pilot's hands as the distinctive twin-boom silhouette of the P-38 Lightning descended toward what he believed was Malta. The compass had failed somewhere over the Mediterranean, and fuel gauges crept toward empty. Through the plexiglass canopy, an airfield materialized through the haze. Relief flooded through him as the wheels touched down on Sardinian soil. Then he saw the uniforms. Italian. He had landed at Capoterra, 60 miles from where he intended to be, and the war had just taken an unexpected turn. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Within hours, the most advanced American fighter in the Mediterranean theater sat in an enemy hangar. Colonnello Angelo Tondi, chief test pilot of the Regia Aeronautica, walked slowly around the aircraft, his experienced eyes taking in every detail. What he would discover in the coming days would fundamentally change how Axis pilots understood American aerial warfare. The Lightning wasn't just fast, it wasn't just maneuverable. It carried something German and Italian engineers had never successfully replicated, a concentration of firepower that could tear apart any aircraft in the sky in seconds. Today, we're going to explore how one captured Lightning revealed the terrifying reality of American air power, how a single test flight shattered Axis assumptions about fighter design, and why German pilots would come to call this aircraft der Gabelschwanz-Teufel, the fork-tailed devil. This is the story of the day enemy test pilots admitted they had never seen 400-mile-per-hour firepower like it. To understand what made the P-38 revolutionary, we must first understand the desperate situation facing Allied bomber crews in 1943. American B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators flew deep into Axis-controlled territory, targeting oil refineries, aircraft factories, and transportation networks. The bombers were formidable, bristling with 50-caliber machine guns and flying in tight defensive formations, but they were vulnerable. German and Italian fighters had learned to exploit their weaknesses. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 and Focke-Wulf Fw 190 were exceptional aircraft, fast, heavily armed, and flown by experienced pilots who had honed their tactics through years of combat. Italian fighters like the Macchi MC 202 and Reggiane Re 2 001 added to the deadly gauntlet Allied bombers had to run. The problem for Allied planners wasn't just enemy fighters, it was escort range. Early American fighters like the P-40 Warhawk and the Bell P-39 Airacobra lacked the range to protect bombers on long missions. Even the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, a magnificent fighter in its own right, could only escort bombers partway to distant targets. This created what strategists called the bomber stream, predictable routes where escorts would turn back and German fighters would pounce on unprotected formations. The mathematics were brutal. Mission after mission, bombers fell from the sky in flames, their crews lost over enemy territory. At these attrition rates, the bomber offensive risked grinding to a halt. Enter the Lockheed P-38 Lightning, an aircraft born from an ambitious 1937 specification, the U.S. Army Air Corps had demanded an interceptor capable of 360 miles per hour at 20,000 feet, with full throttle endurance of 1 hour at that altitude. These requirements seemed impossible with existing single-engine technology. Lockheed's design team, led by Hall Hibbard and including a brilliant young engineer named Clarence Kelly Johnson, proposed something radical. Twin engines, twin booms. A central nacelle housing the pilot and all armament. Counter-rotating propellers to eliminate torque. It was unlike anything flying. The XP-38 prototype first flew in January 1939 with Air Corps Project Officer Ben Kelsey at the controls. The performance was stunning. 414 miles per hour, faster than any American fighter, faster even than most racing planes. Kelsey immediately understood they had created something extraordinary. But the prototype's brief life ended in disaster. During an attempted transcontinental speed record, the aircraft crashed at Mitchell Field, New York, after carburetor icing caused power loss. Despite this setback, the Army had seen enough. They ordered pre-production YP-38 seconds, confident that engineering could solve the teething problems. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The P-38 that emerged from development was a technological marvel. Twin 1200 horsepower Allison V 1,710 engines, each equipped with a turbocharger for high-altitude performance. These engines drove counter-rotating propellers, the left engine turning the propeller counterclockwise, the right engine clockwise. This eliminated the asymmetric thrust that plagued other twin-engine fighters. The twin-boom configuration offered numerous advantages. Engines and turbochargers fit neatly in the booms, with radiators positioned for optimal cooling. The main landing gear retracted into the booms, leaving the central nacelle streamlined. A tricycle landing gear, revolutionary for fighters of that era, provided excellent visibility during taxiing and landing, but the P-38's most revolutionary feature sat in the nose of the central nacelle. 450 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, one 20mm Hispano cannon, all mounted in a tight cluster, all firing directly forward. This concentration of armament was virtually unique among American fighters. The P-51 Mustang, P-47 Thunderbolt, P-40 Warhawk, all mounted their guns in the wings. Wing-mounted guns required careful harmonization, setting the guns to converge at a specific distance, typically 250 to 400 yards. This convergence zone was where all bullets would theoretically meet, creating maximum destructive effect, but it had severe limitations. Too close, and bullets spread wide. Too far, and they diverged. Pilots had to be at exactly the right range for maximum effectiveness. The P-38 suffered no such limitation. Its nose-mounted guns fired in perfectly parallel streams. The 20mm cannon was inclined slightly upward to account for the heavier, slower-moving shells, ensuring all trajectories intersected between 350 and 400 yards. But good pilots could score kills at ranges up to 1,000 yards, more than double the effective range of wing-mounted armament. The mathematics of this concentrated firepower were devastating. The 450 caliber Brownings fired at approximately 850 rounds per minute each. The 20mm cannon added 650 rounds per minute of explosive shells. Combined rate of fire exceeded 4,000 rounds per minute. Imagine facing this weapon. A P-38 pilot squeezes the trigger. In the first second, 67 bullets and 11 explosive cannon shells streak toward the target. The 50 caliber rounds, each weighing 43 grams, impact at 2,900 feet per second. The 20mm shells, weighing 130 grams, explode on contact. Against the aluminum skin of aircraft, this firepower was catastrophic. A 1-second burst could saw a fighter in half. A 2-second burst could disintegrate a bomber's wing. A 3-second burst, the typical engagement time, delivered 200 rounds of 50 caliber and 33 explosive shells. Nothing flying could withstand such punishment. The P-38's weapons were not synchronized because they didn't need to be. Synchronized guns, firing through a propeller arc, lost 30% of their rate of fire to the interrupter mechanism. The Lightning's nose mounting eliminated this inefficiency. Every trigger pull delivered full, uninterrupted fire. The ammunition capacity supported extended combat. Each 50 caliber machine gun carried 500 rounds, enough for 35 seconds of continuous fire. The 20mm cannon held 150 rounds, providing 14 seconds of firing time. Pilots learned to fire the machine guns in bursts while reserving cannon shells for critical moments. The gun sight was equally advanced. A gyro-stabilized lead computing sight compensated for target motion and pilot maneuvers. Where German fighters used simple reflector sights requiring steady flight for accurate shooting, the P-38 pilot could fire during high G turns and still hit targets. By early 1943, P-38 seconds were arriving in North Africa and the Mediterranean theatre in increasing numbers. They scored impressive victories. On August 14, 1942, A P-38 pilot shot down a German Focke-Wulf FW-200 Condor patrol bomber over the Atlantic, recording the first destruction of a German aircraft by an American pilot in the war. In North Africa, the Lightning earned its German nickname. A panicked Luftwaffe pilot, surrendering at a Tunisian airfield, pointed skyward repeatedly, stammering, Der Gabelschwanz Teufel, the fork-tailed devil. The name spread through Axis fighter units, carrying with it a mixture of respect and fear. German and Italian intelligence compiled reports on the P-38 from combat encounters. They knew it was fast. They knew it had long range. They knew it carried heavy armament. But intelligence reports based on combat observations could only tell part of the story. What they needed was a complete technical evaluation, an opportunity to fly the aircraft, to test its limits, to understand its capabilities thoroughly. That opportunity arrived on June 12, 1943, when one confused American pilot made a fateful navigation error. The P-38G that landed at Capoterra represented the latest production variant. It featured improved engines, the Allison V1000, 710-51, 55, producing 1200 HP at takeoff. Internal fuel capacity had been increased to accommodate long-range missions. The aircraft was in excellent condition, suffering only minor damage during the emergency landing. Italian ground crews immediately secured the aircraft and began preparations for ferry flight. Angelo Tondi, one of Italy's most experienced test pilots, arrived to inspect the prize. Tondi had flown virtually every Italian fighter in service. He had tested captured British Spitfires and American P-42s. He understood aircraft at an intuitive level. His initial walk-around revealed an aircraft that was substantially larger than any single-seat fighter he had flown. The P-38's wingspan stretched 52 feet, larger than many twin-engine bombers. Empty weight exceeded 12,800 pounds. For comparison, the Marchi MC-202, Italy's premier fighter, weighed just 5,700 pounds empty. The cockpit was spacious, almost luxurious by fighter standards. Large greenhouse-style canopy panels provided excellent visibility, though the engine nacelles created some blind spots. The instrument panel was comprehensive, perhaps overwhelming. American aircraft carried more instruments than their European counterparts, reflecting different design philosophies. The controls were unusual. Where Italian and German fighters used a control stick, the P-38 featured a control yoke, similar to what one would find in a bomber or transport. This wheel-style control took some familiarization. The throttle quadrant held 2 throttle levers, one for each engine, plus mixture controls, propeller pitch controls, and numerous other levers whose functions weren't immediately obvious. Tondi spent hours studying the cockpit, trying to decode the Americans' design logic. There were no manuals, no technical documents. Everything had to be deduced through careful observation and logical reasoning. Some controls were obvious. Others remained mysteries that would only reveal themselves in flight. The armament drew particular attention. In the nose, below the cockpit, sat the weapons bay. 4 machine guns positioned in a square pattern, 2 on each side of the cannon. The 20mm Hispano cannon occupied the center, fed from a drum magazine. The installation was remarkably compact, all firepower concentrated in less than 3 cubic feet of space. Italian engineers examined the ammunition feed systems, the electrical firing mechanisms, the gun heaters that prevented freezing at high altitude. Every detail spoke to American manufacturing sophistication. These weren't handcrafted artisan weapons. They were mass-produced industrial components, yet maintained remarkable quality and reliability. The engines presented their own mysteries. The Allison V1000, 710, was a liquid-cooled inline 12-cylinder design, similar in concept to Italian and German engines. But the turbochargers were something else entirely. General Electric turbo-superchargers, driven by exhaust gases, compressing intake air to maintain sea-level power at altitude. German aircraft had turbochargers, but they were rare, reserved for a few bomber variants and experimental fighters. Italian aircraft generally lacked them entirely, relying on mechanical superchargers that consumed engine power to operate. The American approach, using otherwise wasted exhaust energy, was elegant and effective. After days of study, Tondi felt ready for a test flight. Italian mechanics serviced the aircraft, fueling it with Italian aviation gasoline, which had lower octane than American fuel but would serve for evaluation purposes. The Lightning was towed to the runway at Guidonia Airfield, where Tondi would conduct the test program. The engine start sequence required careful attention. Primers, fuel pumps, mixture controls, all had to be set correctly. The Allisons coughed, then roared to life, their exhaust notes blending into a distinctive growl. Tondi advanced the throttles carefully, feeling how the aircraft responded. Taxiing proved straightforward, the tricycle gear providing excellent directional control. The toe brakes were powerful, requiring a light touch. As Tondi reached the runway threshold, he performed final checks, ensuring both engines showed proper manifold pressure, oil pressure, and coolant temperature. Throttles forward. The Lightning surged ahead, accelerating with surprising authority for such a large aircraft. The tail lifted quickly. At 90 miles per hour, Tondi eased back on the yoke and the P-38 unstuck, climbing away from Guidonia with impressive rate of climb. This was the moment of truth. Every report, every intelligence summary, every combat encounter narrative would now be tested against reality. What Tondi discovered in the next hour would fundamentally alter Axis understanding of American air power. The P-38 wasn't just competitive with German and Italian fighters. In several critical areas, it was superior to anything flying. The climb rate was remarkable. At full power, the Lightning ascended at over 3,000 feet per minute at sea level. It reached 20,000 feet in less than 8 minutes. Compare this to the Bf-109G, which required over 10 minutes to reach the same altitude. In combat, this difference was decisive. At altitude, the turbochargers demonstrated their value. Where Italian fighters gasped for air above 20,000 feet, the Lightning remained strong. The engines maintained power at altitudes where Axis fighters struggled. This gave American pilots the option to fight above their enemies, diving down with speed and energy advantage. Tondi pushed the throttles forward, accelerating to maximum speed. The airspeed indicator climbed steadily. 300 miles per hour, 350, 400. The aircraft remained stable, controls crisp and responsive. At 414 miles per hour, Tondi leveled off, noting that the Lightning still had power available. This speed exceeded anything in Italian service. The MC-202 topped out at 370 miles per hour. The newer MC-205 Volts, just entering service, could reach 385. The Lightning was 30 to 40 miles per hour faster, an enormous advantage. Speed alone didn't tell the complete story. Tondi performed tactical maneuvers, testing how the aircraft handled in combat scenarios. He performed high G turns, discovering that the P-38 could maintain tight turns at high speed without the vicious stalls that plagued Italian fighters. The ailerons remained effective at high speeds where other fighters' controls stiffened. The elevator harmony was good, though the yoke took some adjustment compared to a traditional stick. The rudders were large and powerful, providing excellent directional control. Stall characteristics were benign. As Tondi slowed the aircraft, testing landing configuration, the Lightning gave clear warning of approaching stall. There was no tendency to snap roll or depart controlled flight suddenly. For such a large, powerful aircraft, it was remarkably forgiving. But the most impressive discovery came when Tondi activated the armament systems for ground testing. The concentration of firepower was unlike anything he had experienced. When test fired into a ground target, the combined weapons produced a visible storm of projectiles. Italian engineers calculated the destructive potential: 450 caliber machine guns, each firing at 850 rounds per minute, one 20mm cannon adding 650 rounds per minute. In a 3-second burst, the standard engagement time, the P-38, delivered 200 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition and 33 explosive shells. Against the lightly constructed fighters of 1943, this firepower was apocalyptic. A Bf-109's fuselage, built of lightweight aluminum with minimal armor, could be sawed in half by a 1-second burst. A bomber's wing spar, designed to carry aerodynamic loads, would disintegrate under sustained fire from the Lightning's concentrated battery. The psychological impact on Italian pilots who witnessed the test firing was immediate. They had grown accustomed to the scattered fire of wing-mounted guns, where only a fraction of rounds hit the target. The P-38's nose-mounted arrangement meant every bullet travelled the same path. Where it pointed, devastation followed. Word of the captured Lightning spread through Italian military channels. By August 1943, Tondi had flown numerous test flights, compiling detailed reports on the aircraft's capabilities. But Italy's time with the Lightning would be brief. The Italian surrender in September 1943 transferred the captured P-38 to German control. The Luftwaffe eagerly acquired the aircraft. It was flown to Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's premier testing facility, located in Mecklenburg-Western Pomerania, approximately 100 kilometers northwest of Berlin. Rechlin was where the Luftwaffe evaluated every captured Allied aircraft, from Spitfires to B-17 seconds. The facility consisted of multiple airfields connected by a hexagonal ring road. Hangars held some of the most advanced and secret German projects alongside captured enemy equipment. Here, test pilots like Hans-Werner Lersch conducted evaluations that informed Luftwaffe tactics and aircraft development. The P-38 received the German designation T9+XB, the T9 code identifying it as part of the Wundercircus Rosarius, the special unit responsible for evaluating captured aircraft. Yellow paint covered the undersurfaces and tail surfaces, the standard marking for test aircraft at Rechlin. This ensured German anti-aircraft crews wouldn't shoot at the very recognizable twin-boom silhouette. German test pilots approached the Lightning with professional skepticism mixed with curiosity. They had heard the combat reports. They knew American pilots claimed exceptional performance. But Luftwaffe pilots also knew that combat reports often exaggerated enemy capabilities. The only way to know the truth was through systematic testing. The captured P-38 arrived at Rechlin in late September 1943, just in time for a special demonstration. The Luftwaffe had organized an airshow to display captured Allied aircraft to senior officers and technical specialists. Multiple captured types would be flown, their capabilities demonstrated to help develop countermeasures. German pilots familiar with every fighter in the Luftwaffe inventory took turns flying the Lightning. What they discovered confirmed and exceeded the intelligence reports. The P-38 was not just competitive. In many areas, it was superior to German fighters. The speed impressed everyone. At 414 miles per hour in level flight, the Lightning was faster than the Bf-109G, faster than the FW-190A, faster than any standard German fighter in service. Only experimental variants and the new jet-powered Me-262, still in development, could exceed the Lightning's speed. But speed was just the beginning. The climb rate astonished German test pilots accustomed to the already impressive climb performance of the Bf-109. The P-38 could outclimb anything in the Luftwaffe's inventory below 25,000 feet. Above that altitude, the turbochargers maintained power where German mechanical superchargers began to fade. High-altitude performance particularly concerned German evaluators. The strategic bomber offensive required interceptors that could reach and maintain combat effectiveness at 25 to 30,000 feet. The P-38's turbochargers gave it sustained high-altitude capability that German fighters struggled to match. The P range was perhaps most troubling. With internal fuel only, the P-38 could fly approximately 1,300 miles. With external drop tanks, range extended beyond 2,000 miles. This meant P-38 seconds could escort bombers to any target in Germany and still have fuel for extended combat. German fighters, designed for short-range interception and tactical support, couldn't match this endurance. The Bf-109G, had a combat radius of approximately 400 miles. The FW-190A was even shorter-legged. American bombers could now penetrate deep into the Reich with fighter protection all the way to the target and back. The armament evaluation produced the most sobering conclusions. German pilots test-fired the Lightning's weapons into ground targets, measuring accuracy and destructive effect. The concentration of fire from nose-mounted guns was something Luftwaffe pilots had never experienced in their own aircraft. German fighters mounted various armament configurations. The Bf-109G typically carried one 30mm cannon firing through the propeller hub and two 13mm machine guns in the nose. Some versions added two 20mm cannon in underwing pods. The FW-190A carried two 13mm guns in the nose and four 20mm cannon in the wings. These arrangements seemed heavy on paper, but the wing-mounted guns required convergence settings, limiting effective range. The propeller-mounted weapons suffered from synchronization gear reducing rate of fire, and the heavier German cannon, while devastating when they hit, fired more slowly than American weapons. The Lightning's combination of four fast-firing 50-caliber machine guns and one 20mm cannon created what German evaluators called a fire cone of exceptional density. At ranges where German pilots would be carefully aiming to place their slower-firing cannon shells, the P-38 pilot could simply point and saturate the target area with projectiles. German test pilot reports noted another concerning feature. The P-38's stability during firing was exceptional. The counter-rotating propellers eliminated torque effect. The twin-boom design created a stable firing platform. German pilots were accustomed to their aircraft yawing and rolling during sustained fire, requiring constant correction. The Lightning remained steady, allowing accurate fire even during high-G maneuvers. The evaluation revealed weaknesses as well, though fewer than German pilots had hoped to find. The P-38's large size made it visible at greater distances than smaller single-engine fighters. The twin-boom configuration was instantly recognizable, eliminating any possibility of visual confusion with friendly aircraft. At lower speeds, below 250 miles per hour, the Lightning's maneuverability was merely adequate rather than exceptional. Italian and German fighters could outturn a P-38 inches slow-speed dogfights. But German pilots also noted that P-38 pilots rarely allowed themselves to be drawn into slow-speed turning contests. The American tactical doctrine, as deduced from combat reports, emphasized using the P-38's speed and firepower advantages. Dive on the enemy from altitude. Make a high-speed firing pass. If the target survives, use superior speed to disengage and climb back to altitude advantage. Never slow down. Never get into a turning fight unless absolutely necessary. This doctrine, combined with the aircraft's capabilities, created a nearly ideal fighter for bomber escort missions. P-38 seconds could stay with the bombers during the cruise. They could climb to intercept German fighters attacking from above. They could pursue diving German fighters that previous escorts had to let go. And their devastating firepower meant that even brief firing opportunities often proved fatal to their targets. The psychological impact of the evaluation rippled through Luftwaffe fighter units. Pilots who had developed successful tactics against earlier American escorts now faced an opponent that invalidated those tactics. The dive and escape maneuver that worked against P-47 Thunderbolts was useless against P-38 seconds that could follow and overtake in the dive. The climb and attack from above strategy that exploited earlier escorts' altitude limitations didn't work against Lightnings that could outclimb German fighters. Even the head-on attack, where German fighters' heavy nose-mounted cannon gave them an advantage, became suicidal against the Lightning's concentrated firepower. Hans-Werner Lurche, the legendary Luftwaffe test pilot, documented his experiences with captured Allied aircraft in his memoir. While he mentioned the P-38, his notes indicate he never got the opportunity to fly it extensively. The aircraft suffered from engine reliability issues caused by Italy's lower-octane fuel and limited maintenance capabilities during its captivity. By mid-1944, The captured P-38 at Rechlin was grounded more often than it flew. Parts couldn't be procured. The Italian fuel had damaged cylinder heads. Without proper maintenance manuals and specialized tools, German mechanics struggled to keep it airworthy. But the damage to Luftwaffe confidence had already been done. The evaluation reports circulated through Luftwaffe fighter commands. Pilots read the specifications and test results with growing concern. The Americans weren't just producing aircraft in overwhelming numbers. They were producing aircraft that were technologically superior in critical areas. German pilots had grown up with propaganda emphasizing German engineering excellence and racial superiority. The notion that Americans, a nation of immigrants and industrialists rather than warriors, could out-engineer the master race was deeply troubling. Yet the evidence sat in Rechlin's hangars, undeniable and thoroughly tested. Adolf Galland, the General der Jagdflieger, commander of Luftwaffe fighter forces, received the evaluation reports. Galland was a realist who understood that Germany faced increasingly dire circumstances. He compared the P-38's performance to the troubled Me-110 Zerstörer, Germany's own attempt at a twin-engine long-range fighter. The Me-110 had failed disastrously during the Battle of Britain, proving too sluggish and unmaneuverable to survive against British single-engine fighters. German doctrine had concluded that twin-engine fighters were a dead end for air superiority roles. Yet here was an American twin-engine fighter that could hold its own against German single-engine designs. Galland recognized the implications. The Americans had solved problems German engineers thought unsolvable. They had created a fighter with range, speed, altitude performance, and firepower that German aircraft couldn't match simultaneously. Individual German fighters might exceed the P-38 inches one or two areas, but none matched it across all critical dimensions. The strategic situation in late 1943 and early 1944 reflected these technical realities. The combined bomber offensive was systematically destroying German industrial capacity. 8th Air Force B-17 seconds and B-24 seconds flew in massive formations during daylight. RAF Bomber Command struck by night with Lancasters and Halifaxes. For the Luftwaffe, the arithmetic was brutal. Every day, dozens of bombers struck German targets. German fighters shot down some, but not enough. The bomber offensive continued despite losses. And increasingly, those bombers arrived with fighter escorts that German pilots couldn't easily defeat. The P-38 seconds were only part of the escort problem. P-47 Thunderbolts provided close escort with their ruggedness and heavy firepower. P-51 Mustangs, arriving in increasing numbers by early 1944, offered even greater range and high-altitude performance than the Lightning. Together, these fighters created layered defense that made attacking the bombers increasingly costly. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. German fighter pilots found themselves in an impossible situation. They had to intercept the bombers to stop the destruction of German industry. But intercepting meant fighting through multiple layers of escorts, each more capable than the fighters Germany could field. Every mission meant facing odds that no amount of skill or courage could overcome indefinitely. The attrition rate among Luftwaffe fighter pilots climbed throughout 1944. Experienced pilots died or were grounded by injuries. Replacement pilots arrived with inadequate training, often with less than 100 hours of flight time. They faced American pilots with superior training, superior aircraft, and superior numbers. The captured P-38 at Rechlin became a teaching tool. Luftwaffe pilots scheduled to fly against American escorts studied the aircraft, learning its dimensions, its performance envelope, its blind spots. Instructors used it to demonstrate attack angles and evasion techniques, but studying the enemy's weapon and defeating it in combat were different challenges. Knowing that a P-38 could reach 414 miles per hour didn't help when one was diving on you at that speed, its 4 machine guns and cannon converging on your aircraft. Understanding its firepower concentration didn't prevent those weapons from tearing your fighter apart. German engineers studied the Lightning, seeking lessons for their own designs. The turbocharger installation drew particular interest. German turbochargers were bulky and temperamental. The American General Electric units were compact and reliable, integrated smoothly into the airframe. The nose-mounted armament configuration inspired proposals for German fighters. Several designs incorporated similar arrangements, mounting all guns in the fuselage for concentrated fire. But by late 1943, Germany's industrial situation made implementing major design changes difficult. Allied bombing had disrupted German aircraft production. Factories were dispersed to underground facilities and hidden locations. Production rates couldn't keep pace with losses. Raw materials became scarce as supply chains collapsed. Fuel shortages, grounded training units, and limited operational flying. The cruel irony wasn't lost on German pilots and engineers. They were studying an enemy fighter that represented everything Germany could no longer achieve. Long-range strategic capability, reliable high-altitude performance, sophisticated systems, mass production without quality compromise. These were luxuries of a nation with intact industry and secure supply lines. The P-38 evaluation also revealed broader American advantages. The aircraft's instrumentation was comprehensive, providing pilots with detailed information about every system. German fighters, designed for simplicity and ease of maintenance, carried fewer instruments and less sophisticated systems. American aircraft incorporated design features that eased maintenance. Modular construction allowed damaged components to be quickly replaced. Standardized parts meant mechanics didn't need specialized tools for each aircraft type. Access panels were positioned logically, making inspections efficient. German aircraft, while beautifully engineered, often required time-consuming maintenance procedures. Changing a Bf-109's engine required specially trained mechanics and took hours. Replacing a P-38's engine could be done by semi-skilled workers in less time. In a war of attrition, these differences mattered enormously. The captured Lightning also demonstrated American manufacturing philosophy. Every component showed evidence of mass production techniques. Stampings replaced hand-formed parts. Welding replaced riveting where appropriate. Yet quality remained high. The Americans had learned to produce complex weapons at scale, without sacrificing reliability. This contrasted sharply with German production philosophy, which maintained traditional craftsmanship approaches even under wartime pressure. German workers took pride in hand-fitting components to tight tolerances, but this pride came at the cost of production speed and interchangeability. By mid-1944, the strategic air war's outcome was no longer in doubt. Germany could not stop the bomber offensive. Luftwaffe fighter units fought with desperate courage but declining effectiveness. American fighters, including P-38 seconds, P-47 seconds, and P-51 seconds, ranged across German skies with increasing impunity. The captured P-38 at Rechlin flew less frequently as parts wore out and couldn't be replaced. Eventually, it was relegated to static display, a trophy representing an enemy that Germany could study but not defeat. When Soviet forces overran the area in 1945, they found the Lightning among dozens of other captured aircraft, silent testimony to the Luftwaffe's desperation for answers. Another captured P-38 made its way to German hands through a different route. In October 1944, Lieutenant Martin Monti defected to the Germans, flying his F-5E photo reconnaissance Lightning from Italy to Milan. This aircraft, given the code T9 plus MK, provided the Germans with a later model Lightning to evaluate. But by October 1944, such evaluations had limited practical value. Germany's situation was increasingly hopeless. The Western Allies had landed in Normandy in June. Soviet forces were pushing from the east. German industry was collapsing under sustained bombing. No amount of intelligence about enemy aircraft would change the strategic reality. The story of the captured P-38 seconds represents a broader narrative about the Second World War. It wasn't decided solely by courage or tactics or even strategy. Industrial capacity, technological sophistication, and the ability to translate resources into military power proved decisive. The United States, protected by oceans, built a military-industrial complex that dwarfed what Germany could achieve. American factories produced aircraft by the tens of thousands. Training programs graduated pilots faster than combat consumed them. Research and development programs continuously improved existing designs while developing revolutionary new ones. Germany, conversely, faced cascading failures. Bombing disrupted production. Fuel shortages limited operations. Raw material shortages forced compromises in quality. The skilled workforce was consumed by military service and casualties. Every advantage Germany held in 1939 and 1940 eroded through the war years. The P-38 Lightning embodied American advantages. It was fast because American engineers solved the aerodynamic challenges of high-speed flight. It had long range because American industrial capacity provided abundant fuel and sophisticated engine management systems. It carried devastating firepower because American manufacturing could produce reliable automatic weapons in quantity. Most importantly, it was produced in numbers that overwhelmed German defenses. Lockheed built over 10,000 Lightnings during the war. Even accounting for losses and aircraft assigned to other theaters, hundreds of P-38 seconds operated in Europe and the Mediterranean. German pilots couldn't avoid them, they couldn't escape them, and increasingly, they couldn't survive combat with them. The psychological impact on German pilots extended beyond individual encounters. When you face an enemy who has superior equipment, superior numbers, and superior support, courage alone isn't enough. German pilots in 1944 and 1945 fought knowing they would likely die. They fought anyway, from duty, from loyalty to comrades, from defense of homeland, but they fought without illusions. The captured P-38 at Rechlin had shown them exactly what they faced. They had seen the future, and in that future, there was no place for the Third Reich. The technical evaluation reports documented everything. Maximum speed, 414 miles per hour. Service ceiling, 44,000 feet. Range, 1,300 miles internal fuel, over 2,000 with drop tanks. Armament, 450 caliber machine guns with 500 rounds each, one 20mm cannon with 150 rounds. Rate of climb, 3,000 feet per minute at sea level. But these numbers, clinical and precise, couldn't capture the visceral reality of facing a P-38 inches combat. The distinctive twin-boom silhouette emerging from the sun, the howl of twin Allison engines at full power, the tracer stream converging from nose-mounted guns, the explosive impacts of 20mm shells shredding aluminum and flesh. German pilots who survived encounters with Lightnings spoke of the aircraft with respect bordering on awe. The fork-tailed devil wasn't propaganda or exaggeration. It was an accurate description of an aircraft that seemed to have no exploitable weaknesses when flown by a competent pilot. The concentration of firepower, demonstrated repeatedly in the captured aircraft evaluations, proved as devastating in combat as the tests predicted. P-38 pilots reported achieving kills with brief firing passes that would have been ineffective with wing-mounted guns. The nose mounting meant accuracy at ranges where other fighters' scattered fire would miss. Combat reports documented this effectiveness through stark statistics. P-38 units in the Mediterranean theater achieved some of the highest kill ratios of any American fighter. In the Pacific, where the Lightning's range and twin-engine reliability proved ideal, P-38 pilots dominated Japanese fighters. America's top two aces, Major Richard Bong with 40 victories and Major Thomas Maguire with 38 victories, both flew Lightnings exclusively. Even in Europe, where the P-38 faced criticism for cold weather reliability problems and encountered the Luftwaffe's best pilots, Lightning units performed effectively. The 55th Fighter Group, first to fly P-38 seconds in Europe, achieved a favorable kill ratio despite operating in the most contested airspace of the war. The German evaluation of the captured P-38 ultimately revealed truths that extended far beyond aviation technology. It exposed the fundamental mismatch between Nazi ideology and material reality. The Third Reich had built its war machine on theories of racial superiority, on the belief that German warriors and German engineers were inherently superior to their mongrel enemies. The Lightning shattered these comfortable lies. Here was an aircraft designed by a team including Clarence Kelly Johnson, the son of Swedish immigrants, built by workers of every ethnicity and background in Lockheed's Burbank, California factory, assembled by women who had never worked in aviation before the war, and it was superior to anything Germany could produce. The Americans had out-engineered the supposed master race. They had solved problems German designers thought unsolvable. They had created not a revolutionary breakthrough, but something more dangerous, a thoroughly competent weapon produced in overwhelming quantities. Angelo Tondi, the Italian test pilot who first flew the captured Lightning, understood this immediately. His reports to Italian military authorities described an aircraft that represented a new paradigm in fighter design. The Americans weren't playing by European rules. They weren't accepting traditional compromises between performance, range, and firepower. Instead, they had applied industrial methods to achieve all three simultaneously. The result was a fighter that could escort bombers to any target in Europe, fight effectively at any altitude, and deliver devastating firepower at ranges exceeding anything Axis fighters could match. When the Germans acquired the aircraft after Italy's surrender, their evaluation confirmed Tondi's findings. But by late 1943, confirmation only added precision to a strategic disaster already unfolding. The bomber offensive was destroying German industry at an accelerating rate. The oil campaign proved particularly effective. Synthetic fuel plants, essential to German military operations, became priority targets. P-38 seconds helped escort the bombers striking these facilities, then strafed ground targets on the return flight. German fuel production collapsed, grounding training units and limiting operational flying hours for combat pilots. Without fuel, even superior tactics and aircraft couldn't help. Luftwaffe fighters sat in dispersed airfields, camouflaged against Allied air attacks, unable to fly because they had no fuel. Pilots with hundreds of hours of training couldn't reach the bombers because they lacked fuel to take off. The industrial war had reached its inevitable conclusion. The captured P-38's most important lesson wasn't about aerodynamics or armament. It was about industrial philosophy. American aviation companies designed aircraft for mass production from the beginning. Every component, every assembly, every system was engineered for rapid manufacturing by semi-skilled workers. Lockheed's production line in Burbank operated with assembly line efficiency adapted from automotive manufacturing. Workers specialized in specific tasks, becoming highly efficient at their assigned steps. Components arrived prefabricated, requiring only assembly rather than hand-fitting. Quality control used statistical methods, rather than relying solely on craftsman's judgment. This approach allowed Lockheed to produce Lightnings at rates German factories couldn't match. At peak production, Lockheed delivered multiple P-38 seconds per day. German factories, using traditional methods, required far more man-hours per aircraft. The productivity gap meant that even if German pilots shot down P-38 seconds, replacements arrived, faster than losses. The Americans also demonstrated superior logistics. The captured P-38 at Rechlin operated briefly, then suffered increasing mechanical problems as parts wore out. German mechanics lacked replacement components, proper lubricants, and technical manuals. Within months, the aircraft was grounded. This same logistical challenge faced the entire Luftwaffe. Parts, shortages, grounded aircraft. Specialized components couldn't be manufactured quickly enough. Bomb damage to transportation networks prevented parts from reaching forward bases. Even when aircraft were available, keeping them operational proved increasingly difficult. American forces, by contrast, maintained sophisticated supply chains across oceans. P-38 units in England, Italy, and the Pacific received steady flows of spare parts, ammunition, and consumables. Maintenance personnel had detailed technical manuals, specialized tools, and training. Operational readiness rates remained high despite intensive combat operations. The strategic bombing campaign statistics tell the story of this industrial mismatch. In 1943, The 8th Air Force flew approximately 26,000 sorties, dropping approximately 53,000 tons of bombs. In 1944, those numbers increased to nearly 300,000 sorties and over 500,000 tons of bombs. German air defences couldn't prevent this escalation. Despite desperate efforts, despite tactics refined through hard experience, despite individual acts of extraordinary courage, the Luftwaffe couldn't stop the bombers. The mathematics of attrition favoured the side with greater production capacity, and that side was emphatically not Germany. By early 1945, the air war over Germany had essentially ended. Allied fighters flew over German territory with minimal opposition. The Luftwaffe still existed on paper, but fuel shortages and pilot losses had reduced it to ineffectiveness. The 5 months saw desperate measures. Inexperienced pilots in jet fighters, ramming attacks, rockets launched from beyond Allied fighter range. None of it mattered. The industrial war had been decided. Germany's cities lay in ruins. Its transportation network was destroyed. Oil production had ceased. Factories sat empty or operated at fraction of capacity. The military, however brave or skilled, couldn't function without the industrial base to support it. The captured P-38, still sitting at Rechlin in spring 1945, witnessed the end. Soviet forces advancing from the east overran the facility. They found dozens of captured aircraft, German prototypes, and experimental designs. All were testimony to a military that had sought answers in technology, but found only confirmation of its defeat. The Lightning that had landed at Capoterra on that June day in 1943 had travelled a long journey. From American production line to Mediterranean combat, from Italian capture to German evaluation, from flying testbed to grounded relic, but its real journey was as a messenger, carrying news that the Axis powers didn't want to hear. The message was simple. America's industrial might, married to competent engineering and sound tactical doctrine, was unstoppable. The P-38 wasn't the best aircraft of the war by every measure. The P-51 Mustang arguably had better high-altitude performance. The P-47 Thunderbolt was more rugged. But the Lightning was the first long-range escort fighter to arrive in quantity, and it changed the strategic equation at a critical moment. German pilots who faced P-38 seconds in combat carried those memories for decades. Interviews conducted long after the war ended revealed consistent themes. The Lightning's distinctive appearance, its speed and climb rate, the devastating effectiveness of its concentrated firepower, the psychological impact of facing an enemy who held most of the advantages. One Luftwaffe veteran, interviewed in the 1980s, described an encounter with P-38 seconds in late 1944. His squadron had been scrambled to intercept bombers. As they climbed toward the bomber stream, Lightnings dove on them from above. In the brief combat that followed, half his squadron was shot down. He survived by diving away and fleeing at full power, the P-38 seconds pursuing until he reached ground level and they broke off. "What impressed you most?" the interviewer asked. "The firepower," he replied without hesitation. When they opened fire, it was like a firework display. Tracer rounds and cannon shells, all converging on the same point. If you were in their sights, you were already dead. We had nothing like it. This was the truth the captured P-38 had revealed to German test pilots in 1943. This was the reality that Angelo Tondi had recognized when he first flew the Lightning. This was the message that reached Luftwaffe fighter commands and caused experienced pilots to revise their estimates of American capabilities. 400 mile-per-hour firepower, 450 caliber machine guns, and one 20mm cannon, all firing in perfect parallel, all controlled by a gyro-stabilized sight, all mounted in an aircraft fast enough to catch any German fighter and maneuverable enough to stay with them. The Germans had never seen anything like it because they had never built anything like it. Their design philosophy emphasized different priorities. Their industrial methods couldn't replicate American production efficiency. Their strategic situation, defending on multiple fronts under constant attack, didn't allow the luxury of long-range offensive operations. The P-38 Lightning represented more than just a successful aircraft design. It represented American pragmatism, industrial democracy, and the principle that free societies, when threatened, can mobilize resources that tyrannies cannot match. Every Liberty ship carrying P-38 seconds to Europe was a floating refutation of Nazi ideology. Every formation of Lightnings escorting bombers over Germany was proof that democracy could outproduce dictatorship. The legacy of the Lightning extends beyond its combat record. The research into high-speed flight control influenced post-war aviation development. The dive recovery flaps, developed to solve compressibility problems, established principles used in transonic and supersonic aircraft. The turbocharger installations informed jet engine development. The concentrated nose armament became standard for jet fighters. Kelly Johnson, who designed the Lightning, went on to create the P-80 Shooting Star, America's first operational jet fighter. Many principles from the P-38 carried forward into this design. The Skunk Works, Lockheed's Advanced Development Division, traced its origins to the secretive P-38 development program. Major Richard Bong, America's ace of aces, flew P-38 seconds exclusively throughout his combat career. His 40 victories made him the highest-scoring American pilot of the war. His success demonstrated what the Lightning could accomplish in skilled hands. Bong used the aircraft's advantages systematically: altitude, speed, firepower. He avoided dogfights and slow-speed maneuvering. He was patient, selecting favorable attacks and declining unfavorable ones. This tactical discipline, combined with the aircraft's capabilities, made him nearly unstoppable. Japanese pilots feared encountering his squadron. They knew the twin-boom silhouette meant danger, and Bong's particular aircraft became notorious through repeated encounters. Bong survived the war only to die in a test flight accident in 1945, testing a P-80 jet fighter. His death removed one of America's most celebrated heroes, but his combat record remained testament to the Lightning's effectiveness. The captured P-38 at Rechlin never flew again after the war. Soviet forces reportedly salvaged it for scrap metal, along with most of the equipment at the facility. No photographs survive of its final disposition. It simply vanished into the chaos of Germany's collapse, one more artifact of a failed empire. But its impact endured. The German test pilots who flew it, the mechanics who serviced it, the intelligence officers who studied it, all carried the knowledge of what it represented. They had seen the future of air warfare, and that future belonged to nations with the industrial capacity to build weapons like the Lightning in overwhelming numbers. The Italian test pilot Angelo Tondi survived the war and continued flying in post-war Italy. He rarely spoke publicly about his experiences with the captured P-38, perhaps because it represented a painful reminder of Italy's defeat. But in technical circles, his evaluation report was considered masterful, a thorough and objective analysis that stripped away propaganda and revealed reality. Hans-Werner Lerche, the Luftwaffe's premier test pilot, survived the war and later wrote about his experiences. His memoir, published decades later, provided insights into the desperate situation German pilots faced. He flew over 120 different aircraft types during the war, including numerous captured Allied designs. Each evaluation added to the growing understanding that Germany faced enemies with superior resources and often superior technology. The story of the captured P-38 is ultimately about the moment when illusions shattered. German and Italian pilots had been told they were superior, their aircraft were superior, their tactics were superior, their will to victory was superior. And then they climbed into an enemy fighter and discovered that none of this was true. The Americans had built a better fighter, not through genius or revolutionary breakthrough, but through competent engineering, sound design principles, and industrial efficiency. The P-38 was a good aircraft made great through attention to detail and relentless refinement. Its concentrated firepower, the feature that so impressed and terrified Axis pilots, exemplified this approach. American designers looked at wing-mounted guns and asked, why accept convergence limitations? They looked at synchronized guns and asked, why accept reduced rate of fire? They found solutions to both problems by mounting everything in the nose, then designed an entire aircraft around that decision. This pragmatic problem-solving characterized American aviation development throughout the war. When the P-38 encountered compressibility problems in dives, engineers developed dive recovery flaps. When high-altitude operations caused engine cooling issues, they redesigned the intercooler installation. When pilots needed better situational awareness, they installed improved radios and radar systems. Each problem received attention. Each solution was implemented as quickly as production allowed. The result was an aircraft that continuously improved, each variant addressing weaknesses discovered in combat. The Germans, by contrast, often couldn't implement improvements due to industrial constraints. They knew their fighters' weaknesses but lacked resources to fix them. The captured P-38's greatest contribution wasn't military intelligence. German technical specialists learned specifications and performance data from the evaluation, but they couldn't change Germany's strategic situation. They couldn't conjure industrial capacity from air. They couldn't unbomb the factories or restore the fuel supplies. What the captured Lightning provided was truth. Uncomfortable, undeniable truth about the war's trajectory. German pilots who flew it understood that they faced an enemy who would overwhelm them through superior resources and competent application of those resources. No amount of tactical cleverness could overcome this fundamental imbalance. The evening after Angelo Tondi's first test flight in June 1943, he reportedly sat in the officers' mess, drinking wine and contemplating what he had experienced. A colleague asked what he thought of the American fighter. Tondi's response was reportedly simple: "We are in trouble." By the time the Lightning reached German hands months later, that trouble had intensified. By the time German test pilots completed their evaluation, the trouble had become catastrophic. By the time the war ended, the trouble had resulted in total defeat. The fork-tailed devil had delivered its message. The laughter of Axis pilots, confident in their superiority, had died in their throats when they saw what American industry had created. 400-mile-per-hour firepower wasn't just a technical specification. It was a weapons system that changed the mathematics of aerial combat. The Germans never expected to capture a P-38 inches such good condition. They never expected their evaluation to confirm and exceed the worst intelligence reports. They never expected to admit that the Americans had built a better fighter. But they did all three, and in doing so, they confronted the reality that would ultimately destroy the Third Reich. In the end, the war was decided not by ideology or propaganda, but by industrial capacity and the ability to translate resources into military power. The P-38 Lightning, with its concentrated firepower and superior performance, embodied these advantages. Every time a German pilot saw those twin booms, every time they heard those twin Allisons, every time they watched tracer rounds converge from nose-mounted guns, they were reminded of a truth they couldn't escape. America had entered the war. America had mobilized its industry. America had created weapons that outmatched what the Axis could field. And America would not stop until victory was achieved. The captured P-38 at Rechlin was just one aircraft, but it represented thousands more, rolling off production lines, crossing the Atlantic, filling air bases across England and Italy. It represented the industrial might of a nation that had barely begun to tap its potential. It represented the future, and in that future, there was no place for the 1,000-year Reich. German test pilots who flew the Lightning understood this immediately. They returned from their evaluation flights with detailed reports about performance and capabilities. But they also returned with something less tangible and far more corrosive: the knowledge that Germany had already lost. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.